Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Center Stage and the second of the Water and Communications program this year at the World Water Week 2024. The Water and Communications program is done collaboratively with the Grundfos Foundation. If you want to know more, please join them outside at their stall 403, where there will be a mingle after this session. This session is going to focus on our future. The future of humanity depends on how we manage our water resources. This will effectively mean a lot for leaders of tomorrow. We have a growing youth population that will be very important to include in our dialogue, provide ownership for, and have representation with. To discuss this issue, we have three experts on our panel. With me in Stockholm, I've got Maike Likilok, CEO of the House of Natural Sciences from Denmark. Joining us online, I've got Charles Shachinda, Technical Officer, International, British Water. Apurva Manjinder, CSR Manager, Grundfos, India. Welcome to the panel. I want to start our discussion with Maiken. We have a double transition ahead of us. We're looking at water, we have a green transition. Both of these will take immense resourcing for skills that we do not yet have. This will understandably shift how we look at education, how we look at the future, how we actually resource this shift. You work with this, and you're actually looking at ways in which we can actually put this into practice. Tell us more.
Yes, I think we have a young generation today that are very engaged in environmental issues and very concerned about climate change and sustainability. And in the education system, we have integrated sustainability and the development goals for the past decade or so. But in many education systems, we lack a focus also on the practical skills and the vocational trades that are very critical, both for the water sector and for the green transition in general. And we believe we need to give young people many more opportunities for participating or for engaging with the water sector and in the green transition. And at the House of Natural Sciences, where I come from, we do this through school industry collaboration in primary school and secondary school, because through collaborations between schools and industry, we can create hands-on teaching activities that are relatable and meaningful for the students, and provide them some of these practical skills and get it into the curriculum and give them also insight into the sector and the opportunity it offers. And we give them some competences to act on these issues.
And the School Industry Connect also allows them to see and have role models for the future and where to move to, and actually take that with them as they move forward.
Yes.
We have a problem with the mic.
Recording in progress.
While that's happening, Charles, I'm going to come to you because, of course, you're a Grundfos Fellow. You're also a youth representative on this panel, and you've done some research into what Maiken is saying. How do we make this connection? What do we need to have in our vocabulary, in our data set, to reach out to young people today? What did you find in your research?
Right, spot on. Thanks to Rati there, and I think McCann is very spot on as well. They're trying to talk about water skills development, especially when it comes to young people. I am, besides my professional work with British Water, I'm also an International Water Association Grundfos SDG 6 Fellow, and as part of that fellowship, I started looking into the more water skills development side of things as a cross-cutting accelerator for progress towards achieving SDG 6. And pretty much that culminated from the more what I call classical challenges within the water sector, things like the silver tsunami that we hear about. And what that means is by 2030, about 30% of the water workforce will be retiring. And we also hear for more staggering and also disappointing statistics that the water sector only accounts for 1% of the global workforce. So what that means by 2030, we'll be facing a really massive challenge when it comes to water skills development and just really people working for the sector to be able to achieve SDG 6. And so because of that, and you hear more from a more medical perspective that if you can't diagnose it, you pretty much can't treat it, right? So I started looking into pretty much three things. So how do you demystify the barriers to water skills development in order for you to be able to pretty much provide clarity on what the major challenge really is? The second bit was really to categorize in a thematic perspective what the barriers to water skills development really are in order for us to be able to really benchmark where the key challenges are. And the last one was to come up with a bar rating that helps to be able to really provide some very pinpointed clarity on where the problem is and how we can solve it. So with that, with the results from my project that looked at water skills development barriers in specific, the results, so I received 72 statements altogether, and they're very representative of the globe. So one thing I was revealing was the social barriers to water skills development were more pronounced, receiving the highest statements at about 36%, and then followed by political barriers at 26%, went on to economic barriers at 22%, and then finally cultural barriers at 19%.
Charles, I'm just going to jump in right now because you mentioned social barriers being the largest in terms of representation. Just for us to understand, break down social barriers for us. What does that entail?
Yeah, so social barriers to water skills development, we're looking at things like limited mentorship and networking opportunities for young people, not only really young people, but water professionals in working within the sector. You're looking at things like low prestige and perception when it comes to water. You're looking at things like lack of awareness of careers in the water sector. You're also looking at things like a mismatch of skills and as well as industry needs. So those are the kind of social barriers you're looking at when it comes to the barriers or probably the hurdles that young people need to leapfrog for them to be able to integrate more effectively in the water sector. And with that, I was just mentioning that when it comes to the more sub-thematic barriers to water skills development, one thing that was very revealing was that the more pronounced barrier that came up was limited financial and entrepreneurship support in the water sector as an economic barrier, which received 10% of the statements. And the next to that was the political barrier, which is more sort of like we hear about it every now and then, young people not being included in decision-making processes or leadership roles, which is very key. And then last but not the least was a proportion, a 6% proportion for both social and cultural barriers to water skills development. Speaking about things, the very things that I mentioned right now, like lack of awareness of careers in the water sector, and as well as when it comes to cultural barriers, you're looking at things like stereotypes and biases. So that was the project that I looked into, and I think it really helps kind of really benchmark and demystify some of those challenges we're looking at. Because obviously, capturing the value of water, we really need to be able to make sure we get rid of all the barriers that are literally hindering, young people and just people working in the sector to be able to see water for what it is.
Exactly.
And how
Charles, your respondent group was international, was it not? If I remember correctly.
Yes, it was very international. Representative of the globe, that's right.
And that's something I want to come to Apurva with, because of course you've heard what Charles has said. When we were doing a sound test right before we started the session, you talked about where you were last evening and what you were doing and what that could mean in terms of making mentorship and connectedness. I'd like to ask you, from your perspective and from where you sit in Chennai, India, how often you had a conversation with the people that you work with, the communities that you work with, where someone says, I want to help my water infrastructure. I want to actually be here to make this better. Or are they talking about wanting to be a doctor, as Charles said, maybe going into consulting? What are you hearing? We can't hear you, Apurva.
Yes, that's Great. A very, very beautiful and very apt question. And as Charles said, taking off from what he shared, I think people in the water sector, and in terms of the need for people in the water sector, people are definitely waking up today because that's become a focus. And I personally believe that, mentorship is the key into tapping into the potential and possibilities that young minds across India and the globe have. And here is where we are doing a lot of work in our social responsibility initiatives and our volunteering efforts because I think these young minds are the torchbearers for the future, and also more importantly, have a tremendous potential of being habit changers in the families and communities that they live in. Because I think the energy, innocence, and enthusiasm is a magical combination and a winning combination, which helps build habit changes. And I think that's the focus as well.
But then I'm going to follow up, Apurva, Mike, and to ask you both, again, coming from what Charles is saying, you're both in the positions of setting systems, setting frameworks, and helping create leadership decision making. Charles used some interesting words that I want to pick up in terms of mentorship. You touched upon it, Apurva, role models, but also diversity in decision making. Do we see youth represented in these decisions, in these discussions? And if we don't, given where you sit and what you are working with, how can we make that happen? What steps do we need to take to actually make that happen? Or is it a cultural discussion that age is a value of patience, and in time you will be a leader, and let's wait? Can we change that? Apurva, I want to come to you first, Mike, and you second.
Thank you for that lovely question. So I just like to touch upon one example of what we did earlier this year for World Water Day. So leading up from the month of Feb for over 3 weeks, we actually had an initiative Pan India where 71 colleagues were involved, and they invested about 463 plus volunteering hours over 3 weeks to impact 5,000 plus school-going children and 130 of their teachers. This was across 8 cities where Grundfos is located in India. So the idea was, how do we explore, the possibility of a water secure future through the young minds of our nation? And the whole idea was, something where we got to learn some amazing nuggets of wisdom, because while the focus was on reminding the children and their teachers to be smart with their lifestyles and habits, we got to learn so much of what's happening on ground. And that was amazing takeaways for us as a team. And this is where I think initiatives that impact communities around us in a meaningful and sustained manner is about delivering, true value. And I think this is something which we need to do more, and bringing in the cultural element into initiatives which could be global, but keeping in mind local flavor, what is needed, and building those is the key. And this is where sharing of best practices and everything also helps.
Mike, and you've talked about in the beginning your school industry connect, and actually hearing the voices through representation and making that connection very clear.
Yes.
In response to what Apurva is saying and to the points that Charles made, we need to engage those voices today. We need to institutionalize them today in order to allow for that energy to be impacted and actioned. What are your thoughts on how we do this?
Yes, our experiences resonate very much with what Charles was saying, that role models play a crucial role, and we always mobilize role models from the companies when we support school industry collaboration. And it's also because choice of education and career pathway is not just a question of what subject you're interested in, but it's very much a question of who and how you want to be in the world. It's very much an identity project. And here it's important that the young people meet the role models from the water sector. And through their personal stories, they can provide opportunities for everyone across genders and educational backgrounds and social backgrounds. And in particular, they can show the opportunities with a vocational education in the water sector as well, and change some of these prejudices that we often meet around the vocational educations. And this is a problem in many countries. And I think in the last decades, we've seen a decline in prestige in the vocational trades. And we need to bring them into the spotlight also to the young people, again, through the role models, both for those who might be inspired to choose that way, but just as much for everyone else to gain an appreciation and respect for these trades.
And to respond to this, and we've talked previously to this discussion, Apurva, before I come back to Charles, I'd like to just get a quick reaction from you, because like Charles said, if we can't name it, we can't diagnose it, we can't treat it. So in order to understand the opportunities for youth, we have to see where the barriers are. And a lot of the barriers can be cultural. And something that Maiken is talking about, vocational training being an empowering lever that we can actually use to actually work with our green transition, to work with what we need in water stewardship. You're sitting in India. I'm making many assumptions by asking this question, but I'm going to ask it. What is your response to a vocational training led discussion? Is there a cultural bias? Is there a thought about how this will be received if that becomes the way we look at water stewardship in India, in South Asia?
I think vocational skilling, vocational, skill development is the key, because anything that is about focusing, on mindset change and habit change with young minds, or with the youth, or even with the general population, on the sensitization of, the importance of water, can only be done through experiential learning, through activity-based learning, through skilling and empowering them, and so that the respect towards that area is increased. And also, I think at the community level, when we do projects, how do we, bring in that importance of water into the ownership and involvement of the community members, from the planning stage till the execution, till the handover, and even post, the project is done, people taking involvement. That's where the cultural change comes in. It's not about someone just doing a project or taking up an initiative or doing something for the sake of it, but going above and beyond that to really look at how we can make that sustained change, so that people start looking at this space and the need for talented people in this space, whether it's ideas, whether it's people who are going to fix a tap for us at our home, whether it's going to be a corporate that's delivering a solution. We need people across all these areas.
And to provide value for what is being done by the different people in different conversations. And that's why I want to ask Charles, because of course now, Purva, Mike, and you've been talking about how we can make these changes, what changes we can bring, be it leadership, role models, ownership. But Charles, you've done the research. You're in the business. Soon, hopefully, you'll be senior management. You will be senior management. You'll be making these changes. What do you want to see? And I also want to add one more aspect to the question. Of course, representation, inclusion, diversity, having that also in the discussion in terms of taking water stewardship with a different generation forward. What would you like to see it implement?
Thanks, Arat. Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think as a point of departure, I think for me, it's always really good to be able to establish the fact that I think some of the greatest gifts that we could ever give or receive is just realizing the fact that all of us serve a purpose that's bigger than ourselves. And really, these can integrate the highest ideas of civilization, such as the promotion of water and sanitation for all people. And I think if we begin to tie that into our ethos and the way we do things in our business strategies, then we can be able to ensure we bring everybody to the table and really integrate all these voices that we want to be able to ensure that they are ahead within the sector and be able to contribute more effectively. On the leadership side of things, I think for myself, I've been quite fortunate, to be honest, but I could be an exception, like for many people, either through my fellowship, through my work. I've been very fortunate to meet really good senior professionals that have really held my hand and be able to give me the opportunity, the platform to be able to share my ideas. And that's the good thing about role models and leaders, is that they help you test your ideas as a person because they've been through that process. But then in the back of my mind, I was trying to think, probably even our grandfathers or fathers or mothers were in the same position because of that cultural resistance. And as part of that research, one thing that I uncovered as well was what we would call an intergenerational incompatibility, where we're not really able to bridge that gap between generations, which is quite a thing that we need to solve to start off with. So that leadership side, I think, really helps with, say, mentorship and networking, because then you have a whole generation just right behind you that's about to take over. But all you look at them as pretty much probably are just there to probably catalyze activity, feel good about themselves. But are they really taking the decisions? Are they really being heard? And I always ask the question, yes, having a seat at the table, it's one thing, but what does that even really mean, right? Is it that you be given a seat at the table just for people to listen to you and that's it, end of the day? But who makes the decision? Somebody else. And I think from a human perspective, whoever you are, whatever your background is, if only people could be integrated, whether you're talking about indigenous populations, where you're talking about young people, you're talking about women, you're talking about marginalized populations, all they really want is for them to be heard, and heard in a sense where their solutions are taken into considerations, because the value of water is just very multifaceted from a cultural perspective, from a social, economic, and political perspective. So that is very key. And you talked about diversity, which is very key. And it's not only diversity in terms of geographical location or boundaries, it's diversity in terms of perspective, it's diversity in terms of background. And these key things are very important. When you look at, for instance, India or say Bangladesh or Nepal, the value of water from a cultural perspective is tied into religion because that is very sacred. So if you can really dig deep into those values that are tied into people's cultures, then you begin to capture the value of water on a more broader spectrum, and people begin to appreciate the fact that they're being included more effectively. So that's where leadership comes from. But you just don't go into those communities and say, well, I've got the solutions because this is how we do it from where I come from. Then you're not providing leadership. So that's what it means to become a role model. Begin to understand the barriers that are really hindering people from integrating into these water sectors. I've got many of my friends that are literally pivoting from the water sector right now because of many reasons. From a cultural perspective, that resistance as well to change and innovation is very key because obviously, historically, we could all agree the water sector has this very public type of mentality when it comes, or perception when it comes to water resources. It's free, everybody can use it. I mean, we just see it flowing in the rivers, so it's in abundance. But really, water is very expensive, and capturing its economic value can be very, very expensive. And I think we need to be able to provide leadership that's more effective, especially to young people, if we want them to integrate in the water sector.
I think what you're saying, Charles, is really valuable that I want to ask Mike and Apurva, because you talk about, of course, how we define ourselves is based on where we come from. Our relationship with water is very emotional, it's very personal. It can have different aspects to how we define it. But that's also not leadership, as you said. That to say that we are bounded by this definition is not leadership. So then it begs the question, does intergeographical collaboration become an opportunity to share experience and showcase different ways of stepping forward, different ways of stepping into the discussion, and different ways of solving for the challenges that we have? Now, Apurva, Grundfos India is one of many global offices that you have. And of course, you have an international connection to the conversations that you have that are localized, but also international. How do you connect these conversations when it comes to what you're doing with youth, with water, water stewardship, and what's happening in the other offices around the world? You're on mute, Apurva.
You've been coming on with some amazing questions, Arati. Thank you for that. So Grundfos globally launched a global volunteering policy, which basically allows any employee across the globe in all our offices to have 3 days of paid time off to do volunteering work. So this, over the last 2 years, has really given us a beautiful opportunity to continuously see how we can be inspired, motivated, and collaborate on various efforts. And this sharing is also regularly happening on our internal platforms. The stories are shared. And this is how we have seen that something that we're doing in India, if a colleague is coming in from abroad, from one of the offices for work, can they be a part of it? Can they visit the project site? Can they be involved in the volunteering efforts? Those are things that have really, really helped us to see how cross-border collaboration is possible and sharing of best practices are happening. So every year we are upping the game. And here also, Paul Duhenson Foundation, which is the foundation that manages and owns Grundfos, also recognizes all of these efforts through community engagement grants for projects where employees are involved, through people awards where our social responsibility efforts are also recognized internally through a global platform. So many such things are actually helping us come together and learn what's happening in China, what's happening in Bangladesh, what's happening in Africa, and how can we take this forward together as a team in different locations.
Mike, and I want to come to you because Apurva has touched on something that I want to bring up in the conversation about vocational training, is that she mentions that, of course, there's resources available to shed light on these questions. There's resources available to scale and to replicate lessons learnt. Now, when it comes to vocational training, we talked about in the beginning how there might be a prejudice in terms of how to scale and replicate. What do you want to see mainstreamed, institutionalized, to bring the value and the opportunity of vocational training, especially when it comes to water stewardship, comes to green transition, into being?
Yeah, I would like to see many more companies and industries to engage in collaborations with schools. And I also think that it's very important to stress that they need to engage also in primary school and very young children, because that's at an early age where they get their ideas about their own opportunities and ideas about the vocational trade. So we need to reach the children at a very early age. And this is something that the companies need to invest in.
So tell me how. Give me a case study. I'm going to push you a little bit on that.
Yeah, well, it's difficult because it's two different cultures, the educational sector and the industry, and there's not a very big overlap, and they have different goals and work in different ways. So they need help to be brought together and find their common goals, and that's what we're trying to do at the House of Natural Sciences, and many other actors are trying to do. But we need to bring them together and have this dialogue about the goals they have in common on creating a more practical education that we know is more motivating for more students, and to inspire more young people to enter these fields.
And these commonalities become important because it's a way of engaging.
Yes.
So you speak the same language, you see a relationship. Charles, your research touched upon that in terms of the barriers and the opportunities. Connectedness becomes one way of engaging with the solutions. If I were to ask you to say one thing to engage both your generation but the generations to come, to get them engaged in water stewardship, in water governance, in water professions, what do we need to have?
I couldn't agree more with Mike, and I think having a comprehensive curriculum when it comes to schools is very key. And a very classic example for me is coming from a more technical background. You know, my background is more structural engineering. For me, success looked like designing a building, you put it out together and you can see the physical structure, and that's it. All the social beats that come with it, all the cultural beats that come with that was not success to me. But the moment I delved into the water sector, everything changed, because my program had at least about 30% much more on the social side, and you had 70% on the technical side. And ironically, the social side really stunned me, to be honest. Begin to understand how just water, underpins our social life and also the political side of life of it. And I think those are things we don't really integrate in the school curriculum, and especially for generations to come, they need to really understand that water is everything. It starts from home, it starts from when they're in the community, whatever they're doing. So capturing that value from our school system is very key. So you need to be able to integrate things like engineering, social sciences are very key, policy issues, and really the environment itself, very key in how we protect it. Because that's our habitat more effectively. So that's very key in terms of enhancing that curriculum that will be able to cater for generations to come and really help them integrate. But also more effectively, I think harnessing that youth energy is very key, where you are able to catalyze and really make sure innovation is brought about from young people. So, putting up incubators that will be able to, innovation incubators that will be able to get more people contributing more effectively when it comes to digital technologies. I think digitalization is a very key thing. I think young people can be very disruptive, which is really key. And I think that way, then we'll be attracting more young people in the water sector and, of course, generations to come.
Prabha, I'm going to end with you. In yesterday's opening ceremony, we had representation from the youth on the table, saying that we have, and to be fair, we've talked about it here, a lot of the steps are tomorrow. A lot of the steps are long term. But the youth are today. They're here right now. They need to be engaged today. So I'll ask you, what would you like to do from Grundfos's perspective, from your perspective, to make that change, to have that inclusive dialogue today?
Mentorship and engagement with the youth, I think that's the key to whatever we are talking about, because the future is, yes, round the corner. But as you rightly said, today, engaging the youth, harnessing the potential of their ideas and the possibilities through them, all of this will really, really help us to make sure that water is there for today and for tomorrow in a very equitable manner for everyone and secure the future for everyone. So mentoring, I think, is something where changing mindsets, changing habits, changing individuals, communities, everything can be done in a sustained and positive manner.
Thank you so much. So mentoring and challenging the narrative is the best way forward. Apurva, Charles, Maiken, thank you so much. Please join me for giving them a warm hand of applause. And please, we have a photo exhibition at the back. Please look at that, Tanzania.